In your opinion, Sgt. Pepper has held up to its reputation? It still sounds as good now, 50 years later?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
When was the last time you actually heard it from start to finish recently?
The other day.
The other day? Because of this? Or
No.
Okay.
My kids gave me an iPod a couple of years ago, and I've transferred all my CDs on there. And I was going through artists by alphabet, and I got to the Beatles, so I listened to all the Beatles for like 3 weeks in a row. And, I will say this. I think, the joy that I experienced seeing Help in the theater back in '65 and just singing at the top of your lungs to songs that you loved by a band that you worshipped. Now 50 years plus gone since those days, it's been 55 years, or do the math on 53 years since '64. To this day, in all my life, the Beatles still are a sense of joy for me personally. I listen to their music, and I feel comfort, I feel joy, I feel happiness, and I still feel that way with this.
And just why do you think that's so? What is it in the Beatles music that provides you that exact feeling you just described? Just one of those je ne sais quoi things?
I don't know. I think perhaps because I was infected with it at the age of 11 to begin with, and a very important transitional part of a kid's life. Plus the music was great. I mean, there are some songs that by the Beatles that aren't as melodic as others. Nobody's perfect. But I just, I don't know this, and I don't know if I want to know. I don't know if I need to know why this happened. But I'm so glad it did.
All right. And your kids are into music. Do they still like it? Do they think it, whenever they hear Pepper or heard Pepper, were they, maybe not as much for you because it's a different era and all that stuff, but whenever they heard it the first time, or, did they say, wow, this is really cool? Yeah,
no, they grew up with it, and they were exposed to it, in the womb, actually. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I'd play music for my wife, and I say, sit here and let me put on some Beatles or some Moody Blues for you, no, my kids are huge Beatles fans, and Radiohead fans too. So,
Yeah. All right. Anything else we didn't go over? Anything else you'd like to add? Anything else that sticks out for you?
No, I just I remember in my professional career, I had a chance to interview Ringo Starr. It was on the phone, but I was talking to him. And if someone had told me in 1964 that, later when you got older, you'd work in radio and you'd have a chance to actually talk to one of the Beatles, I would have gone, get out of here,
Yeah. So what was he like? What was he like when you spoke to him?
He was wonderful.
Yeah.
He was just friendly and nice, and, not an attitude or anything like that. I mean, he was
Ringo.
Yeah.
The stereotype Ringo, peace and love.
Peace and love. Well, he lives it.
Yeah.
And saw McCartney 3 times in concert, the most recently at Piedmont Park. And I remember standing there outside at Piedmont Park with all the people. Must have been 35, 40, 50,000 people there. And I remember Got to Get You Into My Life came on. And we were all singing at the top of my lungs. I thought, this reminds me when I was 12.
Ha!
And it was just pure joy.
I was at that show too, and my son, who he's now older, but he was probably about 5 or younger than that, and I wanted him to see a Beatle in person, and but at that time he was scared of fireworks. So when we get to Piedmont Park, we were getting close, and I said, well, look. Paul's going to do a song called Live and Let Die, right. And there's going to be fireworks in it, because I've seen McCartney a couple times. I know that's just one of those things. That's going to. So, okay. And so we ended up walking back, because it was on the grass, right? So we ended up walking back for a little bit further from the stage. So whenever Live and Let Die came up, we were far enough from the fireworks that he didn't get too scared.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you think there's always, do you think that there's, in today's music, is there sort of a band, do you think, that could mean as much to kids these days compared to your even my age, or it almost seems like music is too scattered now, and there isn't a single group or a single person. There isn't an Elvis or a Beatles.
Yeah, I think you've answered the question.
Yeah.
I think it's nowadays there's so much choice. The very obstacles that prevented me from getting the music I liked when I wanted to when I was a kid, because it wasn't available. I mean, you had to go to a record store, you had to get there, you had to have the money. Otherwise, you had to rely on the radio to hear the songs you liked that they were going to give to you. It was out of your control. And people nowadays have much more control about what they have access to, which is a good thing. And but when you've got an act like the Beatles coming along in 1964 that looks completely different, and there's been a lot of talk about, well, why were they so special, and especially in America? And you can talk about, well, they helped bring American youth out of the malaise of following the Kennedy assassination a few months earlier. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But Ed Sullivan was the only way you were going to get it in those days. And he embraced it, had him on for 3 weeks in a row. I've since seen the videos, of course, over the years, but I didn't see it then. And it was many years before I got to see it. But it was just, this is a phenomenon. And you saw the way kids were reacting, the screaming and all that, and the obsession to it, and how everybody was, okay, we're going to grow our hair long, and that whole British mod and rocker thing that was big in the mid-'60s, and all the other bands that jumped on it, and they were, it just exploded. I mean, the Rolling Stones and the Dave Clark Five and all those bands they had their screamers too, and, but the Beatles, they gave it up when they wanted to. And
yeah.
I wonder, of course 2 of them have passed away, but if they'd kept on, I'm glad they never became an oldies act.
Because there's the old saying about the beautiful temple that lived in the village, that was in the village, and some guy tore it down. And they said, why in the world would you do that? Because I don't want to see it decay.
Yeah.
It's always going to be beautiful. James Dean is always going to be good looking. He's never going to be bald fat. He's never going to be Marlon Brando.
Yeah, you're right.
In his 70s or whatever.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so, there is that. But, it's obviously it was a special album, special time. Oh, and on a side note, they said one of the reasons why the Monkees came around is because the Beatles were getting a little too, the music was getting in their hair and all that was getting too much for the 10, 11, 12-year-olds, so we needed someone who could fill that void.
Recreate it, yeah.
Yeah, and on some level they arguably did, not as big or not as important because it was already past, or at least that original, but
they were huge in their time,
they
too.
Were too,
I
yeah.
mean, they really created a big buzz.